Okay, a lot of people have been asking what I've actually been going through. People think I panic sold, but it wasn't quite like that. In the past few years, we've seen Tesla dip to low price levels before, and I've made videos on them, and my strategy had actually been to sell at the bottom then too. Except I would sell the shares and use the cash to buy leaps and options on the dip to leverage more the recovery. Every time it dipped to those levels, it was FUD. The fundamentals were the same. I would check them relentlessly, go over all the numbers, and make sure everything was going to be okay. But this time it felt different. Demand appeared to have dried up. Interest rates are the highest they've been for a really long time, and it simply becomes too expensive for many to buy a car. Consumer confidence is down, and a lot of people are suffering financially due to inflation and higher living expenses, meaning they have less discretionary income. Not only that, it also looked like we were headed into a recession, and in such a time it might be hard to sell cars, especially if they're much more expensive than the average. It looked like there was no choice other than Tesla having to drop prices, and from my estimates it would mean that Tesla's prices need to be adjusted to a level that would reduce operating profit by about a half. On top of everything else that was hitting Tesla at the time, if operating profits for the year are about to halve, then I thought we may see the stock price go sub $100. This dip was different. The fundamentals had changed. Demand was no longer there. Then people saying that I was one of the only Tesla bulls left, and I started to get paranoid as to what everyone else knew that I did not. Added to that, Elon selling a large amount of his shares and then jumping ship to Twitter and seeming less focused on Tesla. This left me with even more doubts as to the company. If the CEO, who is telling us that this will be the most valuable company in the world, is selling his shares and now spending most of his time working on Twitter, then we get the numbers for the 4680 sales, and we see that they are only at a 4 gigawatt hour a year run rate, when we need them to be closer to 20 gigawatt hours a year run rate to hit volume production for the Model Y in Texas. It felt like Elon realized that they couldn't pull off dry battery electrode, and maybe FSD just isn't possible, and he's jumped ship to work on Twitter and somewhat given up on Tesla. Then other various bulls out there also changing their sentiment and getting cross with what Elon was doing with his politics on Twitter, and actually hurting his biggest customer base Tesla has. The music had stopped playing for me. I'd lost my conviction with Tesla. It was the most sober feeling I've ever had, followed by one severe hangover, as I felt I was no longer drinking the Kool-Aid. I felt the largest disconnect of my life. A stock I'd been holding for nearly 6 years through all the dips and recoveries, and just like that, gone. It was so ingrained in my life. I studied every aspect of this company down to the electron, bit, and watt, even studying the entire history of motion. I realized that places like Twitter are pure echo chambers. I went and talked to all the bears to hear out their thesis and build a new idea of what this company really is. As a bull, it's not easy hearing the bears or wanting to believe them. In fact, psychologists say it literally stimulates the same part of the brain as having pain inflicted on you when you suffer cognitive dissonance. Equally, confirmation bias releases pleasure, so it's understandable that investors want to follow what feels good and avoid any potential pain. In that community, no one is ever allowed to doubt anything Elon says, or you become incredibly unpopular, despite how often Elon has been wrong, or done things he said he wouldn't. Instead, they come up with platitudes such as Elon time or Elon be Elon. But he hurt a lot of shareholders in his last sell-off, broke the dam, and then the institutions left. The shorts came in heavy, and then people were margin called. A ton of FUD on top of that. Then Tesla missed the tax credit for the Model Y. And, as I predicted, Tesla's prices had to come down. On top of that, how I mentioned that the progress of 4680s is not going well, Elon then gives his target guidance for the year, and at 1.8 million, we basically see no growth in production for the year when compared to Q4. Q4 saw about 440,000 units, which is very close to 1.8 million annualized, especially if you factor in the downtime we saw in December for Shanghai. As I'd stated, that Tesla had no way of increasing production in the new factories, as they're limited on 2170 cells. The only way is more 4680 cells, which, as we're seeing, are not going well. And on top of that, the chemistry is not what we'd been promised. And the energy density is far from what we'd expected. My dad had the majority of his retirement in Tesla. Yes, you might think that's not clever to put most of your retirement into such a volatile stock, but he didn't. He only put about 20% of it into Tesla. But Tesla went to the moon, and it became the vast majority of his wealth. And no, he didn't buy on margin, and only a small proportion of it was on leaps. But I didn't want him to lose any more, if this company was no longer looking like it was once promised, and might end up just being another car company. If the market ends up valuing it as a car company in a recession, then there was no telling how low the stock price would go. This might have been the toughest decision of my life. In reality though, despite Tesla now looking like their profits will be half this year due to lower demand and lowering prices, the stock price had already been destroyed so much that an outlook of profits being half was beyond priced in really. And then, as we have gone over countless times, Tesla have the margins to remain profitable at such low prices. However, they do need to increase their supply in order to gain market share. I've said many times before that my channel aims to be as objective as possible and is not solely for confirmation bias purposes and to pump the stock. It's to follow the fundamentals. For me, the fundamentals had changed. I felt the ethical thing to do was let all of you know at the time that I had changed my opinion. Of course, everything went the other way. The market decided that that was the recession, and that we'd already been seeing so much deflation that the Fed was likely to pivot. And the market suddenly priced in rate drops. On top of that, we were suddenly inundated with good news from Tesla, and then an earnings call that seemed to have put everyone at ease, despite a target of just 31% growth year over year. Cybertruck volume production being delayed, and 4680s being delayed. The market didn't care. Well, the retail investors didn't. The money poured in, as they also heard that perhaps 2 million vehicles might be produced too, and figured Elon was just sandbagging. Then Jerome Powell announced the rate increases as 25 basis points, which the market had already priced in. He then said there would likely be 2 more rises still to come, but also spoke quite dovish about seeing inflation actually come down. The market was so trigger happy, it almost didn't matter what he said. It just wanted to run. They know the Fed can't keep hiking rates, as the government is also subjected to these high interest rates and have to pay interest on the massive amount of debt that they built up. So the market called his bluff. On top of that, he even said there is probability of a soft landing, which the market also inferred as very likely, despite the inference coming from him being more likely we'll see a market downturn. Anyway, now Tesla has lowered prices and are still likely profitable, although I'm not sure Q1 will be as good as many hope. It will likely be below Q4 when it comes to earnings. So we're potentially dealing with a company that has earnings going down, no growth in production for the year relative to Q4, the core business component of the business 4680s pushed back another year, and the major product, the Cybertruck, also pushed back until sometime next year. Yet the market still rallied. But Tesla have lowered their prices so much and started a price war. However, this may just be an EV price war, and Tesla can likely win at that, due to the fact that no one can produce EVs like for as low a cost as Tesla. And Tesla have a massive amount of cash on hand, but so do legacy companies too. I was happy to ride out a recession with Tesla. If you recall, I'd made many videos telling people to prepare for the recession, at the end of 2021 even. I'd even showed you how I was selling shares and leaps when the stock was above 1100 pre-split, and I put aside $500,000 to cover me in a recession, and to buy on the dip. But I could only ride it through if I still saw progress on 4680s coming into fruition. I can't see how Tesla can grow without them. They need to get costs down and sell production up to a massive level with the new Model Y factories. When they're at capacity, it would mean about twice as many Model Ys to sell, which means prices have to come down even further, which eventually means there is much less room for margin. Of course, demand is being affected right now by such high rates, but soon it could also be affected by a recession. And if that is the case, then Tesla really would have to be selling at loss. Which, yes, does make it much harder for the competition, but it also means that Tesla's stock price could really get crushed. Anyway, I've been dollar cost averaging my way back into Tesla, but I'm still keeping the majority of my funds in cash. I think it far more likely that we see a crash than a trip to the moon at this stage. On the other hand, fiat currencies are in big trouble. There just doesn't seem to be any safe place to invest right now. The central banks are trying to take it off everyone, whether cash, equities, or property. Stay vigilant through these tumultuous times. Thanks for listening. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon.